Hey guys, so today we're checking out the AFE Momentum GT Cold Air Intake with the Pro Dry Filter in black, fitting all 2009 to 2018 5.7 liter Ram 1500s. So a cold air intake is going to provide a number of different benefits to your truck, including giving you some better airflow for some performance gains, including horsepower and torque, some better throttle response, better efficiency, and it's also going to be a great supporting mod to any other engine modifications that you already have on your truck. Now this option by AFE is going to do all of that with a high quality construction, and it's going to outflow your factory intake by up to 23%. Now that's all thanks to that filter that's in there. That's going to be a dry filter, perfect for you guys that are a fan of a dry filter over an oiled filter. Now with this filter, you're going to have a little bit less maintenance than an oiled filter, and it's going to increase that filtration over an oiled filter. So if you are a fan of a dry filter over an oiled filter, then this is going to be a great choice. Now what I do really like about this cold air intake in general is the fact that this is going to have an enclosed air box. Now it's going to provide a lot of protection to the filter inside. It's still going to have an air dam up at the front for maximum airflow, but you're getting a lot of protection. Great for you guys who are located in a wetter climate or take your truck off-road a lot and just plain and simple don't want any extra contaminants getting inside to that filter. Now, I would like to mention that this is not going to be CARB certified. However, you do not need a tune in order to install this on your truck. So right out of the gate, this will add 14 horsepower and about 19 foot-pounds of torque. However, if you'd like to add a tune, obviously that will help out your performance. Not to mention, once you pop your hood, this is going to offer a very sporty look, especially with this construction. Now, with all of that being said, this is going to come in at around $450. So this is going to be a more premium option in comparison to some other choices, but in my opinion, that is for good reason. This is going to have a very high quality fit and construction, and it's also going to come with some high quality components. Not to mention, a lot of other options on the page are usually just going to include a heat shield that's going to seal the hood once the hood is closed, and not a completely enclosed option like this. Now again, that's going to be for protection from outside elements, but it's also going to protect from any hot engine bay air getting to that filter, keeping that air as cold as possible to get inside your intake manifold and give you those performance gains that you are looking for. So if you are a fan of a dry filter, you're a fan of that enclosed air box design, then this is going to be a great choice. Now install is going to be a 1 out of 3 wrenches on the difficulty meter. You're going to need some very basic hand tools to get the job done in probably an hour to 2 hours worth of your time. So speaking of that install, let's jump into that right now. The tools that I used for my install were an impact wrench, an 11mm and 8mm deep socket, 1/4-inch drive ratchet, a flathead screwdriver, and white lithium grease. So our first step to taking off our factory intake is to disconnect our MAF sensor. This is just going to be the plug right on the front of the intake tube there. Just got to press down and pull back on that tab. Then we can wiggle off our PCV hose. So after the PCV is disconnected, what we can do next is loosen up the clamp on the throttle body. I'm going to use an 8mm socket as well as a 1/4-inch drive ratchet to get that done. Once that's loosened up, what we can do is pull up on the intake tube and remove it from our throttle body. And because our air box is held in by grommets, what we're going to do is pull up on this as well. Right. And then we can start to maneuver our intake out. So now that our intake is out of the way, what we can do is pop off our engine cover and just move this to this side. We can actually just leave it there. So what we need to do is take off our breather hose. I'm just gonna pull it out of there. We're gonna put this to the side. Right. We're also gonna take off that small elbow as well. So next we can grab our elbow fitting and our provided hose. So you're gonna have a longer hose. This is going to span across. Then we're gonna have a smaller hose that's going to go right next to that oil fill there. I put a little bit of white lithium grease just to help slide it over that elbow or that fitting. What we can do next is place the hose over our breather vent. Right. Then we can put our engine cover back on. Now we can install our intake. So before we put together our new intake and install it on our Ram, I wanted to sit it next to our factory intake, tell you guys a little bit more about the similarities and the differences between the two and why this option by AFE is going to be a big upgrade compared to the factory. Now this is going to completely outflow and filtrate a lot better than your factory system. That's all thanks to this filter right here. Now this is going to be a large 9-inch conical filter, and it's also going to have 5 layers to it, so you can ensure that this is going to do a way better job at keeping contaminants out of your engine as far as it is compared to the factory paper element. Now your paper element is great for stock applications, however it's not going to give you the best flow and it's just going to do a mediocre job as far as filtration is concerned. Now when moving over to this dry filter by AFE, this is going to pull in a lot of cold air. It's going to outflow your factory paper element by about 23%, and it's going to do a really good job at filtering out any contaminants because of that element that's there. Not to mention, this is going to be a dry filter, so this will offer a little bit more filtration than an oiled filter, and you're not going to have to do as much maintenance, or maintenance is going to be a little bit easier in comparison to an oiled filter. Now speaking of maintenance, the air box here by AFE is also going to have a little window, so you can keep an eye on your filter throughout the time that this is installed on your Ram for maintenance purposes. Now speaking of the housing, this is going to be another similar thing that the AFE intake has with the factory air box. So this is going to be a completely closed air box from the factory that's going to provide a lot of protection to that factory filter, and it's also going to have an air dam up at the front. Now that's really the same story for the AFE intake. As you can see, the only real big difference is the fact that this is going to be styled a little bit differently, a little bit more modernized and sporty in comparison to the factory air box, and it's also going to have a window up at the top to keep an eye on that filter. Now that's going to offer a little bit more protection than some of those other heat shield options, especially great for you guys who want that extra protection, or you're living in a wetter climate, or take your truck off-road, or do any water forging with your truck. Now when it comes to the intake tube on the AFE option, this is going to be a little bit larger. That's going to provide some better airflow, and with it being CAD designed and injection molded, this is going to have a very good fit. Now speaking of that, this is going to come with everything that you need in order to install it, and it's going to have high quality couplers as well as T-bolt clamps, which are an upgrade from the factory standard clamps. So speaking of that, let's swap over some of our factory components onto our new AFE intake and install it on our Ram. So like I said, we do have to swap over a couple of things onto our new intake system. That's going to include the grommets that are going to make sure that this sits correctly inside the engine bay, and then we have to swap over the MAF sensor as well. So starting off with the grommets, all we have to do, I do have a flathead on the table just in case they get stuck, but you should be able to just pinch the larger part at the bottom and pull it through the bottom, just like that. Now there's going to be 2 on the side, and if we flip this over, it's also going to be a couple at the bottom. Looks like one is still stuck inside of our engine bay, so after these are off, what we can do is just pop out our MAF sensor, and then we can completely get rid of our factory intake. So the MAF sensor is down at the bottom of the intake tube. All we really have to do is twist it and pull back. Now you might have to wiggle it a little bit. There is an O-ring in there, so it is pretty sealed. Right? You can put that on the table. You can put this aside. So what we can do is take our rubber bushing for the MAF sensor, place that in the intake tube, right at that mounting location, right at the front of the intake tube. Make sure that that's sitting flush on both sides. There's going to be 2 ridges. Then we can take our MAF sensor and place that down on in. Now this is going to be a pretty tight fit, so if you do need some grease, it a little bit up, make sure that goes through. That can be helpful. So I'm just gonna use a little bit of white lithium grease, making sure not to get any on the sensor. We kind of just want to get that housing in the O-ring to sit down on it. So you want to make sure that the map is in there with the tab flush. I just used a glove just so it was a little bit more comfortable in my hand. And then what we can do now is put the intake tube aside and install our grommets. So as you can see on the side here, this is where 2 of our grommets are going to be located. So again, just like on the other intake, with the larger side down, I'm going to push these in. This is where a flathead might be helpful, just to guide in the rest of the grommet. Right. Then as you can see, there's 2 on the bottom as well. And we are actually missing one, but you would put the 4th grommet in that hole there. So at this point, now that everything is moved over to our intake tube and our air box, we can now install our air box on our truck. Now that we're over at the truck, we can take our air box and drop it down on in. You want to make sure that the air dam goes under this line here and that we're lining up the grommets on the outside as well as down below. Once everything's lined up, you can give it a good push down. Right? So that is in place. Now we can add our filter. So now that our air box is there, what we can do is grab our filter and pop that into the air box. It is going to be a pretty tight fit. So after it's on, what we can do is grab our large T-bolt clamp. This is going to go around the housing itself. Then we can tighten that up with an 11mm socket. Next, what we can do is install our coupler on our throttle body. So with both of these smaller standard clamps, what we're going to do is just place that down over the throttle body, making sure that it's completely flush with the bottom. Then we can tighten it up with an 8mm socket. I'm just going to tighten up the bottom one to keep it in place for when we attach our intake tube. Once that's tight, we can grab our intake tube. We can slip our medium-sized T-bolt clamp over our filter. What I'd like to do here too is grab our PCV pipe and slide that in. Then we can orient our intake tube into our filter and then into our throttle body coupler. Then we can tighten up our clamp on the filter with that 11mm socket. We can tighten up our top clamp on our throttle body coupler with that 8mm socket. And then we can plug in our MAF sensor harness, and then we're all set to go. So that's gonna wrap it up for my review and install. Make sure you like and subscribe, and for more videos and products just like this, always keep it right here at AmericanTrucks.com.